Hey, what's going on, Creator Factor fam? I am the host who loves you the most, Ozeal. And if you don't know, this is the podcast for business-minded content creators who value community, collaboration, and building a brand of impact and influence. Today, I'm beyond excited to sit down with someone who has truly earned his stripes in the world of the creative content and marketing world. He co-founded one of the world's first branded podcast agencies. He's an OG in the game. He's partnered up with global brands such as Ford, Slack, BMW, and Adobe, just to name a few. He's also the author of a brand new book that just came out called Earn It, Unconventional Strategies for Brave Marketers, where he breaks down the strategies and the mindset that helps creators like us and brands earn real attention, because that's a real challenge right now, right, guys? And he's all about helping content creators earn the benefits of doing marketing in a different way, which is the reason why I had to invite him to be on the Creator Factor. So if you're listening or watching this and you're ready to do things differently and join hashtag Team Unconventional, I want to welcome to my Creator Factor family, none other than Steve Pratt in the building. Steve, brother.
Ozeal, thanks for having me. And I think I'm gonna have to start using hashtag Team Unconventional now. So thank you.
Use it.
Yeah,
that's it. You're welcome.
You've already given me a gift today. Fabulous.
I'm telling you. Yeah. There you go. That's how we do things over here, Steve. Well, first and foremost, brother, just congratulations. First book. How does it feel?
It's surreal, honestly. Like it's I've done a lot of different media things in my life. I worked in television. I worked in radio. I ran a music service and I had a podcast company. I've never done a book before. And it was like this really big, massive creative project that takes a long time and you have to wait a long time before it comes out. So from like inception to when it came out, it's like a couple of years. And so to actually have it out in the world and be talking to people like you about it, it's pretty exciting. It's fun. It's overwhelming, but it's very, very nice.
What was the biggest challenge in writing this book?
You know what? Honestly, I think the biggest challenge is trying to kind of eat your own dog food when you're when you're talking about making something that earns attention and you're talking about using unconventional strategies and doing different things that, like undermining conventions, that you have to do all of the things that you're talking about in the project you're doing. So the book is actually an unconventional book in a lot of ways. And I hope it lives up to the promise that it's worthy of time and attention.
Listen, it's beautifully designed. Your website, which by the way, stevepratt.com, it'll be linked up in the show notes. Amazingly done. It's well branded, just looks different. Just love the vibe, great energy, good colors. And then I downloaded the first chapter of the audiobook, which again, I'll make sure that I link it up for you in the show notes. You get a free audio chapter of Steve's book, Earn It. And the audiobook sounds amazing, Steve. I'm like, what am I listening to? It's just soundscape and there's sound effects and you narrate it, which I'm a big advocate for authors doing their own audiobooks. And you did that and you nailed it. Dude, you're on point. Was this part of your strategy? Like, I'm going to design this perfectly. It's going to be the visuals, the audio. Give us a little bit of background. What was the strategy behind putting this together, man? Because everything is on point.
Well, thank you. I got to say, that means a lot because we did put a lot of time and effort thinking about how can we make this thing pop and be unconventional. And, my whole deal with this book is that we're in a place where there's so many things that are trying to vie for our attention every day as regular people in the world and as audiences, just an unimaginable amount of things trying to get our time and attention. And we've just put up such big barriers where, you have to be really good or really valuable if you want to actually get people's time and attention. And so again, when you're talking about putting something out in the world, it's a big creative project. It's like, well, we actually have to make something that is worth people's time and attention, that will earn it and will stand out as being somewhat different or break some patterns or be a little bit surprising where you're like, oh, what's this? That arouses some curiosity and gets you to pick up a book and look at it because the cover is interesting or unusual. Or when you get into an audiobook where you set a really high bar to do something that is different than all the other audiobooks out there. And I needed to give a shout out to a few people on this because the best part of any creative project are the people you collaborate with that let you elevate all that stuff. And I worked with an amazing designer named Peter Cocking at my publisher Page Two, who just absolutely crushed all the design stuff and was like really took the challenge of doing an unconventional book cover and unconventional design and nailed it. And then for the audiobook, I reached out to some people that I used to work with at my podcast company that I ran called Pacific Content,
Mm-hmm.
Pedro Mendez and Gaetan Harris. And Pedro is an amazing producer and director, and Gaetan does a lot of amazing sound design. And we're like, what's all the stuff we could do that would be different with an audiobook? And Pedro used to do audiobooks, and he's like, there's all these things you're not allowed to do in audiobooks at a major book publisher, but it would make for a better listener experience. Let's do all of it. And so we did.
Love it.
And we had so much fun doing all of it. I think,
Mm-hmm.
honestly, writing the book on its own is a fairly isolating creative project, but doing things like the audiobook or talking about the design, super, super collaborative. Those are my favorite parts of the whole journey. And I'm just thrilled with how they all turned out.
Yeah, well, shout out to the creative team because all of you knocked it out the park. I mean, talk about living up to the unconventional, name and doing things differently. And I felt like all of you, did a fantastic job of packaging this up and delivering it to us. So,
thanks.
kudos.
I'm glad you noticed it all. That means a lot.
Listen, I'm a sucker for design. Steve. So like I look at that, and then when I listened to it yesterday, I was like, oh my God, it sounds amazing. So yeah, I'm right here. Audiobook, highly recommend. And of course, the book looks amazing. So again, make sure you guys get a copy of it, earn it. In the first chapter, you talk about one of my favorite brands, and it brought a smile to my face because a lot of people, when you talk about some of the favorite notable brands out there, everybody goes to Apple. And although I'm a big Apple fan, I feel like Apple has done a great job with branding and their messaging. Red Bull. Red Bull is one of my favorite brands, and especially being someone who's been in the event organizing space, hosting events and hosting meetups. And I was, a little fun fact here, Steve, I was actually a former break dancer.
Oh, cool.
And when I saw Red Bull hosting events globally and investing in the breakdance community, because they understood that was part of their audience, and there's an extension, right? There's motocross and there's all this, but they understand culture and they understand multiple areas of culture that they need to be involved with. And they've done a fantastic job. And you talk about that infamous, that stratosphere, that jump that they did early on. For creators that are watching, listening to this, let's break that down a bit. Because obviously you and I have a common love for Red Bull and respect. What can creators learn from what Red Bull has done as a brand?
Well, I think there's a bunch of things. I think number one, like they were probably one of the biggest factors that made me feel comfortable leaving a traditional media company and going to start my own company, was seeing that anybody can be a media company today, that you don't need a broadcast license, and you really just have to be able to make things that people want to spend time with. And Red Bull was already doing that. They acted like a media company as a brand, and they just built up an enormous amount of content that people loved and talked about and shared and told each other about because it was surprisingly awesome. And the best part for me was always that Red Bull never was selling you Red Bull directly. Like all the videos, there's no people cracking cans of Red Bull and chugging it and talking about how it tastes or why it's different than Monster or anything else out there. It was about how watching these videos made you feel, and they all gave you an adrenaline rush. They all made you feel like excited. And I was like, oh yeah, that's what you want to think of when you think about Red Bull, is you want to think about having an adrenaline rush, that's what Red Bull stands for. And it just felt very, very smart and progressive. And the fact that people were spending loads and loads of time with Red Bull, and that they were getting a lot of joy and entertainment from Red Bull content, meant like, next time, like if I'm going to buy an energy drink when I'm flagging, it's probably going to be Red Bull because I've spent tons and tons of time with them and they've created a lot of value in my life. And if I don't have that relationship with, any of their competitors, I'm choosing Red Bull. And to me, that felt like a really obvious strategy where they don't have to monetize every single video. They have to earn my attention and get to build trust and a relationship with me. And then with patience and doing that over time, I'm going to become a very loyal customer.
What can we pull as far as if you look at a tactic for creators? Obviously, what you just said makes total sense, right? It was energy, drink company that positioned themselves around culture, and they added all these cool elements and breakdancing and motocross and all these really fun activities, and obviously the big jump that happened. And they position themselves as just this really fun, innovative, provocative, progressive, funky, cool brand. What can we as creators, especially for solo creators that are watching or listening, how can we position what we do? Because I know you talk about brave marketing. How can we be braver in the way we market ourselves when it comes to building our personal brands as a content creator?
I think honestly, the biggest thing is there's a bunch of pieces, but I think figuring out who exactly you're trying to reach and
Mm-hmm.
having a really clear idea of who your audience is, and then figuring out what everybody else is doing to reach that audience and doing something that's different and something that is unique and can only come from you is really the secret sauce to almost all of it. And, I use the term creative bravery a lot. And for me, creative bravery is, how far are you willing to go to make something that is really, really special, that is going to be really, really valued by the audience you've identified? And, how special and unusual can you make this thing where it's kind of one of a kind, that it is good enough? Like if you asked yourself some questions, like test questions about whether the show is creatively brave that you're making, or the content or videos that you're making, would I tell people about this if I wasn't the one who made it? Is this truly an exceptional thing? Am I respecting every single second of my listeners' time or my viewers' time? Is this truly something where, after spending time with all of my content, an audience member would say, that was time really well spent? If I had a chance to go back and reuse that time and make that same decision, would I double down and being like, I am absolutely spending time with this thing because it's so good? That's how high the bar is now for being able to get people's time and attention. And I think there's a lot of people out there like, you know what, volume is the way to do it and to put out a lot of content. And I know that,
Right.
Algorithms drive volume, and there's a lot of pressure for ad supported media to get volume. But the real truth is, if you don't have people's time and attention, you have nothing anyways. And mediocrity doesn't earn attention, and boring doesn't earn attention, and average doesn't earn attention. You really have to strive for making something that's really exceptional. And I think Red Bull does that over and over and over again. They don't put out mediocre stuff. And my message for a creator would be, should you think about doing the opposite of some of the things that the truths that are out there, or the supposed truths from other places? Like, you've got to be always on, you got to reach the most number of people possible,
Right.
and focus on reach. For me, it's really about, I would prefer to focus on fewer people, like a smaller audience, and make their favorite thing on the
Mm-hmm.
planet, and get tons and tons and tons of their time, and build up a really deep relationship with those people, because that's where a really interesting business is. And that's where you get a community of people that love you and are going to support you with your business.
Yeah, that's it's interesting you mentioned that, because I was having a conversation with a creator friend of mine, and we were saying how it's so challenging and I know content creators who are watching and listening to this could relate to this, in that we're trying to, one side, play the algorithm game, right? And then also be creative and do things that just feel right for us, that we can tap into our own bravery. And it's finding that sweet spot where it's like, okay, do we play the algorithmic game, and how creative do we go, and how far can we go on both ends, especially when you're building a creator brand? Some of the gurus out there say, well, just play the algorithmic game, because that's going to give you more views, and then you could become who you are. But what I'm hearing from you, and you let me know, is that you're saying that should not be the game that we should play. It should be more of strategy of, who are we serving, doing things differently, and then just making sure that we serve a small community, even if it's 1,000 true fans. But just serving that community is a lot more valuable than trying to reach the masses and go and play the algorithmic game. Is that correct? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, I have to say, like, the 1,000 True Fans is such a great reference. Like, I love that Kevin Kelly article, and
Yeah.
I used to work at a music service in Canada, and it was all for independent musicians of all shapes and sizes, all different genres of music. And the 1,000 True Fans thing came out when I was there, and it just felt like that this is a really, really smart idea for the internet. And it's funny. So this music service should not have existed. It was so weird and so niche that it should not have existed. Like, if it was any traditional radio station, they would have said, this is the dumbest idea for a station we've ever heard. It will never work. And if you're a music fan, so this is the this is the pitch for the radio station, okay? It only plays Canadian music. So there's no international artists at all. That's a horrible idea for any radio station out of the gate. It only plays new music. So there's no hits, there's no there's no big things that you're familiar with from 10 or 15 years ago. It's only new artists who are generally not on major labels, so indie artists. And it plays a wide variety of genres all at the same time. So in an hour, you might hear rock, pop, hip hop, heavy metal, singer-songwriter, country, electronic music, like you name it. Mm-hmm. And there's no radio station. It's all online. It makes no sense. It was a huge hit. And the reason why is because there's a very small pocket of people who are music omnivores, who like all genres. Yeah. And who want to discover new music and be the first person to hear stuff, where they love new artists and they love discovery and they want to be the people to share it with everybody else. And in any given market, there's not enough of those people to make a radio station, but there's pockets of those people all over the world. And if you make something special that's just for them, they love it and they become very, very loyal to that thing. And so I remember, this is a long time ago now, 2005, we put out a legal music podcast with all these indie artists, again, all Canadian and a weird mix of genres. And it became a massive, massive hit globally. We were getting like 80, 90,000 downloads a week in 2005. And that to me is the value of super serving an audience that is underserved and figuring out how to make an awesome thing for them. And if I play to algorithms in today's piece, I feel like the algorithm is going to control what I'm doing, and I'm not going to actually have a strategy other than follow the algorithm. But everybody else is going to be trying to follow the algorithm also, and you're kind of at the mercy of an algorithm for figuring out what you're going to do and trying to figure out how to game an algorithm rather than trying to how to serve an audience. And to me, that piece around like what is the gift that you can give an audience that's going to create huge value for them is the entryway to building relationships with people and where you're going to get a lot of time and attention.
I love that. You worked with one of the first, branded podcasts, Pacific Content. You were there working with a lot of big brands like Slack, and I mentioned a few others. What can creators learn from that approach that you took? Because I felt like you were really kind of ahead of the game when you introduced, branded original podcasts to B2C companies, B2B companies. You got into that space, but curious to know like what was kind of some things that kind of really stood out creatively that smaller content creators can adopt.
Well, it's interesting. Like I think the piece for us that we believed at our core was that if you make a show that talks about your own products and services all the time, no one's going to listen to it.
Yeah. That's a big lesson, by the way, for a lot of indie creators out there.
Yeah, like me. If you're always like, hey, welcome to my show, buy my course. Yeah. No one's going to listen to it because no one wants to listen to an infomercial, right? Yeah. And so the idea that you got to make a show and thinking about what is the gift that this company can give to people that people are going to really want to spend time with and value at the end of the day, but that also does a business job for them, that there's a business outcome that comes from sharing this information with people. And so for a company like Slack, they wanted to be associated with the future of work. They didn't want to necessarily like, we're here to kill email and Slack's different. They could have done that, but instead they made a show that was kind of like, we understand work and we understand the pain points of current work. And we're going to have all these people coming on and talking about cool things about where the world of work might be going. And we have a really unusual, playful, fun brand voice. And you can read it in all the Slack messaging everywhere, like inside the product and all over the place. It's full of emojis. It's a fun, casual place. And so like, well, let's make a podcast that sounds like Slack is to use and make it fun and playful and have that kind of voice. And so we made a show that never talked about Slack. It never talked about messaging, but it was very similar to the Red Bull piece around how it gave you an adrenaline rush, when you watch Red Bull. Mm-hmm. Slack gave you a sense of like, oh, these people really understand work and they're fun and playful. And it's a really good time listening to this show where I'm learning stuff and I'm having fun in a casual environment. And the CMO at the time was a guy named Bill Masitis, who was just super, super smart and progressive. And he knew from a bunch of data that in order to get people to sign up for a team or to become a paying customer of Slack, they had to have somewhere between like 10 and 20 phenomenal brand touch points with Slack. And putting out a podcast with amazing content that people were pleasantly surprised that this brand made a show that was good and wasn't an infomercial was a way to put some of those touch points on a schedule. Every 2 weeks you put out an episode that you could just build up this confidence that people are like, I'm getting to know who this company is, and I like who they are, and I'm having fun spending time with them. That those 10 or 20 brand touch points happen pretty quickly, and people can jump on and sign up for a team and try it out. So, I think that piece around, again, make something great, make something that's generous, audience first.
Yes.
And do it consistently over time. You can't just do like one or two things and expect people are going to trust you. It's like, to me, a lot of marketing and building a business is kind of like dating, that you don't really want to have your first date and somebody's just like hardcore pressuring you, be like, we have got to get married right away, and I need a baby, and we're buying a house, and like, let's start sharing our financials. It's like, you just run for the hills.
You're done.
And
great analogy.
Well, it's like you have to get to know each other, right? And you have to build up trust over time by being consistent in who you are and showing your values and getting to know each other. And then when you trust people, you end up being like, hey, we should get into a relationship. And then at some point, maybe you're going to commit to them if they're the right person.
Yeah.
And it just feels like there's a lot of real short-term pressure being like, I have got to monetize and commercialize this immediately.
Like the latest hacks, right? We live in a constant hackathon where it's just people always looking for hacks and shortcuts. Yeah.
Yeah. And I feel like, it's unpopular to say this because no one wants to hear it in a culture of hacks and productivity and shortcuts.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard work to build 1,000 people who care deeply enough to spend money with you, but it's worth it. Like that is the path to doing it, is to think enormously about how can I create something that is worth their time and attention and create value for them. That's hard work, but it's also really fun to do that. Like the joy of being able to make something that really connects with people where they're telling other people about it because it's created so much value. To me, that is the whole magic of being a creator and having a creative business, right?
I love it. Yes, 1000%. You're the founder of the creativity business and, being in the creative business game. And I loved it because, when I first started, it was about 10 years ago when I got into the podcasting space. And, back then, creative entrepreneurship was kind of like a new term. Like, it's like, really, and I come from the music world as well. And it was always that struggling artist, you're an indie, and you're pitching yourself and asking for permission to get, noticed and recognized. And now, you start seeing a shift of this creative entrepreneurship space kind of evolve, and now into this space that we're both in is, creators and brands, and now big companies, right, Steve, that are embracing creativity and content creation and marketing as the marketing, like the way to market to. And we saw, you mentioned, we talked about Red Bull being very early on understanding this concept of culture and community. And I'm curious to know your thoughts, because you do workshops and keynotes and you do consulting with the creativity business. What are you seeing? And are you seeing a shift now of big companies, whether it's small, business companies or businesses or B2B, B2C companies now acknowledging and saying, this content marketing thing is a thing. Maybe we should start a podcast, or maybe we should start a YouTube channel. Are you seeing that shift now to where now they're embracing what we've been doing and we've been preaching all along?
Yeah, 1,000%. I don't think it's ubiquitous yet. Like, I think there's still a lot of growth to come.
Yeah.
I still can't believe, honestly, I mean, when we started this podcast company in 2014, I think we were the first company on the planet that was like, all we're going to do is help other companies learn how to think and act like media companies and make really, really great stuff that, your favorite show might come from a brand, which sounds crazy at first, but that's what we wanted to do. And I think we did it with a lot of the clients we worked with. Honestly, I remember we had, this is kind of funny. Like, this is how weird it was when we started. We had an employee who, in very early on was like, just started yelling at us in the middle of our office. And he's like, you're going to have to double my pay and pay me just it was a ridiculous number of money he wanted. If you want me to keep doing this work, because I'm going to tell you right now, it's a stupid business idea and no brand is ever going to make a good podcast, and no one's ever going to want to listen to a podcast, and the shows are going to be garbage, and no one's ever going to become a client. It's a stupid business. So basically, I'm going to hold you for ransom if you want me to keep doing the work. And we're like, oh, you know what? Maybe you're not the right fit for the business, and we're not going to double your pay.
Yeah.
But there's a little bit of like, man, I hope we're not nuts that this is a thing. And to see now where there are, like, there's a lot of companies doing amazing work in branded content and branded podcasts. But there's a ton of companies that are like, this is just almost table stakes, is you should have a good podcast. Mm-hmm. I think the part that's an area for growth is that there's too many shows that are average still. And there's too many shows that are, like CEOs talking to their clients or talking to their senior staff about how smart they are, instead of thinking about, that real creative bravery of like, how can I make somebody's favorite show that could only come from our company, where again, in a Red Bull zone, I know what you stand for and who you are because you've brought a lot of joy and value into my life. That's the area for growth is, can people get more creatively brave? And I think the opportunity for those marketers are thinking about that is the win is you get to build up an audience that, actually wants to hear from you on an ongoing basis and wants to spend a lot of time with you if you do something great. I've used this analogy, a couple times, but, like, imagine if you, like, your doorbell rang and you open the door and there's like a CEO of an insurance company there. And he's like, I would like to invite myself to come and spend a half an hour in your living room every 2 weeks with your family. How does that sound? It's like, that sounds horrible. That's a horrible idea. If you make a great podcast, you kind of get to do that. But you don't get to do it by being like a CEO coming to a living room talking about insurance policies. You got to think about, like, what is the stuff that I know that would be really valuable for this group, and how do I tell it to them in a really compelling, interesting way?
It's really interesting that you share that, because, I was thinking about, even like, for example, we can use this show, right? Creator Factor. And when I'm thinking about how I'm serving my community, the content creators that want to build a business and brand around their message. And, I know there's a ton others out there. And I know I was talking to a friend of mine, not too long ago, and they were like, I want to start a podcast. I'm like, what is it? Is I want to interview entrepreneurs. I'm like, great, dude. That ship sailed like 10 years ago. So it's just one of those things where things have evolved, and it's like, even the challenge for me as a podcast content creator, I'll put myself out there, is just, obviously there's a lot of interview-based shows, but, what are some of the things and elements, signatures that I can bring to this show that could be different? Now, my whole hopes for our listeners and watchers is just, there's an unlock, right? I brought an amazing guest. I got Steve in the building, and there's things that are going to jog your brain, that's going to help you think about how you can creatively think outside the box. And where I'm going with this, Steve, is I would like for you to I'm going to put myself in the hot seat, is like, where do you see, even as somebody who's hosting a show focusing on the creator economy and helping, aspiring content creators who want to build a business, what are some other things? Is my zag more of like the questions that I ask, my craft? Is it the guest? Is it my style and the way I express myself? Is it, I'm curious to know, how can creators who have shows can stand out, and not only just shows, but YouTubers, how can we find our signature voice to make it stand out?
So it's a great question. And I will say, you are right. Like, you do have a really unique personality and voice and energy, and it's great. And I love it. And I would double down on that. And I think, my advice to any creator is figure out who you are. Like, figure out what your voice is and what your values are and why you exist in the world, like what you're trying to do with your show. Figure out what makes you weird, or interesting or different than everybody else. Like, in a sea of entrepreneurship podcasts or creator podcasts, looking at your competition and seeing like, oh, here's what every other person is doing. I'm going to do something that is different and embrace the stuff that I'm really good at, that I'm different than all those people. Like, it's a good look in the mirror, and it takes a while. But if you're trying to fit in, you're going to fit in and it's going to get lost. And I think in a way, my message is always like, do the thing that is only you and stand out and differentiate yourself. Can I give you one other weird music example as a music guy?
Please.
So as an interviewer, that it's really hard to differentiate an interview if you're talking to somebody who's like a celebrity it might be one of the hardest things is to get a celebrity who's been interviewed hundreds or thousands of times and been asked the same questions over and over and over again to give you an unusual or interesting response, or to actually get them to pay attention to an interview. And it's really hard to get audiences to remember your celebrity interview out of all the thousands of interviews they've done. So there's a guy in my hometown of Vancouver, Canada, who's in his 50s, and he is the most unusual and effective celebrity interviewer I've ever seen. And he does not look like a celebrity interviewer. He does not sound like a celebrity interviewer. He dresses very unlike a celebrity interviewer. He wears a tam and plaid pants. And his superpower is research. And he does more research. He outworks every other researcher on the planet, where every single time he shows up for an interview, he blows people's minds. And you got it. It's Nardwuar, the human serviette. And most people didn't know who he was. Such a good example. And most people don't, for a long time did not know who he was. And he could not get big names because they're like, this guy is not playing by the rules. He's not doing the same stuff. But then people like Snoop Dogg kind of said yes and had these interviews where he revealed things about them or asked them questions from their past or brought them these very thoughtful gifts of like albums, or like I know he gave Snoop Dogg like this red fox doll, and Snoop Dogg is like, you can literally just see in real time Snoop Dogg's head exploding, being like, what is going on here? This is unbelievable. And now it's a point where he has millions of followers online, and everyone wants to be interviewed by Nardwuar. And still they know that he's going to do this. They know he's going to do the research, and they know he's going to come in and tell them things. And their heads still explode because he's found stuff that they can't even imagine that he's found out about them. If you don't know who Nardwuar is, so NARDWUAR, go Google it and look at him on YouTube, and just even like reaction videos. I never get tired of it. He's just amazing.
Thank you for reminding me of that. And what such a great example, especially coming from an interviewer standpoint, of someone who delivers that special signature. Only he could do it. And you're right. He does extensive research. And I love getting the reactions when he interviews, because they're like, what? How did you know? And that's the special sauce.
How did you know is probably the most common thing. Right. And if you can make people who've been interviewed thousands of times saying like, how did you know that? Yeah. Where did you find that out?
Yeah.
Like, man, what a gift that is. That's pretty cool. And as an audience member, you're like, I want to watch this because I don't know how it's going to unfold. I think that's maybe the other interesting thing is, as a creator, if the listener or the viewer always knows what's going to happen because it's really conventional, it's not as exciting. But if there's something where you're kind of on the edge of your seat being like, what's going to happen next? Or you're in a story and you're like, I want to hear how this ends because I have to stick around because I'm invested in it and I need to know how it ends. Or if there's a question being posed and I don't know the answer to it, I'm going to stick around to figure out, are you going to answer the question and teach me something that I didn't know before? Those are all things that separate your show from a lot of other people too.
Yeah. Those are great questions, Steve, for us, especially for all my interview-based podcasters and creators out there. I think that's something that will definitely jog your brain and have you think about how we approach our craft and what can we do different and stand out. I love that. Okay. Let's talk about podcasting, because you are an OG. You've been in the space longer than I have. And again, you were one of the first branded podcast agencies. What are your thoughts on the state of podcasting, Steve, and where do you see it going?
It's going to be I'm going to be a little bit of a broken record answering this. So I apologize if I'm being repetitive, but it's a great medium. I don't see it going anywhere. I think there's a lot of debate around like, oh, what's happening with video with podcasting, or how do we, what's a download or what's not a download? Is it streaming? It all comes down to me for the fact that people want to spend time with things that are interesting to them, and they want it on demand, and they want it easy to access. And whether it's video or whether it's audio or whether it's short form, whether it's long form, to me, it doesn't really matter. I think the magic of it is that anybody can be a media company now. And that, if I think about myself as an audience member, and probably everybody listening thinks as an audience member, you're not going to choose things like, if you have a zillion things that are on offer to you, you're not going to choose stuff that you like. You're going to choose stuff that you love over stuff that you like. And it is far better to think about where, like this, again, this is the magic of having so many options out there, is you can make something that people really, really love if you focus on exactly the right people and think about doing something different that doesn't exist anywhere else yet. And to me, that is the reason why there's an infinite number of those underserved audiences out there. And there's a ton of creative opportunity to make something that's different and awesome out there. And I don't think that's going anywhere. I just think it's a question of can you be creatively brave enough and create enough value for people to actually earn their time and attention? That to me is just that in some ways doesn't have to be a huge budget proposition. Ideas are free. Creativity is free. It's funny. I'll give you one example of just a really, really, because I know creators, you're like, oh, that's great. You worked with Ford or Dell or Charles Schwab, they have lots of money to make really good things. Mm-hmm. So I got sent this. So if you think about what is maybe the least creative place on earth when you think about creative bravery, it might be LinkedIn, right? Like if I said, hey, what's the coolest stuff you've seen on LinkedIn that's really creative and out there? It's very different than what you'd probably say it's all on TikTok or, whatever. Right. So I got sent this thing on LinkedIn last week. It was a cereal company called Surreal that's based in the UK. Never heard of it before. And they had 100,000 people, I think, that joined their LinkedIn in the last month. And I was like, oh, that's really interesting. What are they doing? And the headline in the LinkedIn was, "We are not a cat food company. Please do not be confused. We are a cereal company. We do not make food for cats." And there's a carousel, and it was just a PDF, like a text and photos PDF that cost 10 cents to make, in Canva or something like that. Mm-hmm. And it was like a 40-page carousel deck of just text. And I went through all of it because it was a really fun, weird story where I was like, this is weird. Why are they getting confused with a cat food company? And it was just this playful thing that they post pictures of cats and dogs because they perform better than cereal ads. and as a result of posting pictures of pets, people are saying are you a cat food company? And then it's no, we're not. We're a cereal company that makes high protein, nutritious, delicious cereal. We just have. And I was like, oh, this is what a great thing. That's you did. Awesome. You just got me in for 5 minutes. Attention. And I like you. And I know exactly what your cereal actually is. Yeah. Because you have this creative way with your voice and the way that you approach communicating this stuff.
That was a hook.
Yeah, it was a great hook, and it was unexpected. I kind of was like, what are they talking about? I'm curious. I want to see how this plays out. And I'm totally in. So creativity and ideas don't have to cost a fortune. I think that's the interesting thing is, can you come up with those things that will get people to perk up and being like, I want to know more.
Yeah. Love that. Yeah. I got to get you. You have to send me that. I have to check it out. But also, if you look back on your journey, and I'm going to, this is more of a mindset question, Steve, because I know a lot of, our audience, they're building their businesses as a creator. If you look back from, your, work with, I believe you work with America Online as well.
That was a long time ago, but yes.
A long time ago. I don't mean to date. Me too. I read that. I was like, America. I was like, oh my God, he's a real OG. I'm like, yeah, Steve.
There were CD-ROMs and everything. It was great. Yeah.
I remember those days. But yeah, so you've been in the trenches, and again, you have an extensive background in digital media. From having a job and then transitioning into entrepreneurship, are there any things that skills or mindsets that creators today can, adopt and embrace as a creative entrepreneur that you've learned having a day job and then transitioning into the creator world and entrepreneurship?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's probably two things. One, I wanted to be an entrepreneur way before I actually did. And I wish I had done it earlier, but just life circumstances and feeling like I was in the right place where I could manage the risk if things didn't go well.
Yeah.
I needed to be in the right place. And I was very, very careful to set up a safety net of 6 months before I stepped off the ledge and left my job to start a company. Mm-hmm. And I think anybody who's thinking about jumping out and doing something, give yourself a buffer and a safety net so that you're not putting a crazy amount of pressure on yourself to do a lot of short-term stuff or that urgency thing that we're talking about. Building a business that's successful does take patience and consistency to be able to create that value. If you can give yourself a safety net before you take the leap, probably a good idea. And the other one, honestly, is just know your business model. I think there's a lot of different business models out there, creativity wise. And I think ad supported is always the one that people jump to because it's the most common business model, but it's a really, really, really hard business to be successful in. The numbers you have to get, like you can just do back of the napkin math. If you're, selling ads at a, $25 or $30 for every 1,000 listeners, you got to have a lot of listeners to be able to actually pay yourself to do that work, and knowing what that looks like before you start something is really important. And, so for me, one of the biggest reasons, apart from seeing that brands could become media companies if they did a really good job, was also the business model of working in branded content was very appealing to me from, kind of like a risk management piece where we weren't going to do any work until we had a contract with somebody saying, here's the budget we're doing and here's the amount of episodes. And then we could just reverse engineer the type of show that we could make for that budget so that we would never lose money. And, there's always stuff that's going to come out where you could have the rug pulled out from under you. But I think before you get going, make sure that you've got a model where you're like, if this works, I'm going to be fine. And I think a lot of creators will jump in and be like, if I build it, they will come, and they won't necessarily unless you do a lot of hard work and have patience for it. So yeah.
Do you recommend jumping on that? You say you pick a business model, and I love that. One of the things for creators, Steve, as you may or may not know, a lot of us have ADHD and are all over the place and trying to do so many things at once. And one of the things is just picking with one thing. What's your take on just kind of helping creators to kind of focus in on should it be just one business model as far as one offer, or is it, how do you approach the creator space from a business standpoint from there?
Well, it's interesting. Like, I don't know what, I think everybody probably has their own right answer. Like, I don't think there's one right answer.
Personal, right?
For everybody. But my gut is that you should have at least one thing that you're really, really good at and really focused on that is going to be like, I don't think you could probably be great at 8 different business models at the same time coming out of there and thinking about what is almost like what's the primary way that I'm going to make money on doing this. And then know that there's probably other little revenue streams that can come out of it, but building at least one core value proposition and figuring out what are the different ways I can monetize that. I think there's different ways for each creator, but if it ends up that you're managing 10 different revenue streams, maybe you're not keeping your eye on all of them or optimizing the best way to do all of them.
Yeah, that's great advice. As we land the plane, brother, I have one last question to ask you. If there's one creator factor, just one, that every creator should learn and master, what would that be?
Oh man, that's a good question. You know what? It's probably generosity. Like it is probably generosity of thinking about what are the things that I can give to other people. There's this idea of a psychological principle of reciprocity where, people are more likely to return the favor to you if you go first and are generous first. And I feel like in content and creator world, that is the starting point, is that, this is a hard thing it is a tough truth. No one's waiting to hear from you. No one is waiting for a brand new podcast or a brand new YouTube channel. You have to go first and create the value for other people first and be patient that it will come back to you over time.
That's beautiful. Because I believe that's
I don't know if it's beautiful. It's hard, but it's
no. It's what got me thinking. When you landed with that was just I was thinking when you said generosity. I mean, that landed with me because I do believe that like remarkable marketing is rooted in generosity, and I do feel like that's something that creatives are pretty good at as far as being generous. But one of the things that I see a lot of challenges for creators is that we put the content out there and we want the ROI. Like, where can we monetize this podcast? This, especially for indie creators. How can I make money? How can I get this to a point on YouTube where I can start making AdSense? And it's like the narrative starts switching. And I'm like, what just happened? You were such a generous person giving value and being useful to your community. And now, and I get it, it's kind of that starving artist where we want to monetize what we do, but there's patience and there's a level of generosity that needs to be involved first, building the community before you start monetizing it. So I'm glad that you touched on that, brother, because I feel like a lot of creators skip over that, or at least try to press fast forward to get to the money quickly.
One of my friends is a guy named Tom Webster who runs, he's a partner at Sounds Profitable. And he has this great saying, again, another kind of tough truth. You don't deserve an audience. No one deserves an audience. And I think that if you start with that mentality, like, I don't deserve one, I have to earn it by doing something special and interesting. it's a great starting point. And that's a question, again, another like look in the mirror being like, does this deserve an audience? It's a good gut check, but it's also like, again, if we're all creatives and we're all out here because we like making creative work, what an awesome challenge to do that and to set a high bar for yourself and go after it. I love it.
New book, Earn It, Unconventional Strategies for Brave Marketers, stevepratt.com. Steve, my brother, thank you so much. I really, really enjoyed this conversation, my man. I just want to let you know that I want to acknowledge you. I have a lot of respect. I learned about your work through an interview you did with James Critland. Shout out to Pod News. And I went down the rabbit hole. I was like, who's, Steve? And I started going and I started learning more about your background and then this amazing book. And I was like, wow, this is what we need as content creators, as brands, to really start thinking outside the box when a lot of things are starting to look and feel the same. There's always that one leader that comes out of nowhere and says, all right, let's step it up. Let's do things differently. And you could do it. Come on, we're creatives. What better way to think outside the box than creatives? And I think sometimes we get complacent in what we do. And it's important for us to be reminded of our creative superpower to be able to challenge the status quo and do things differently. So, brother, I want to thank you so much for showing up and doing the good work.
That's a great way to wrap it. Thanks, Ozeal. I had a great chat with you, and I'm really appreciative of you spending this time with me.
Stay in touch. Great work. Cheers.
Thanks.